Ladies and gentlemen, RosterWatch Nation, welcome back to the epic RosterWatch podcast, brought to you by RosterWatch.com and by Underdog Fantasy. Go visit Underdog Fantasy right now. Use promo code ROSTER for a 100% deposit bonus up to $100. Get into the Best Ball Mania 3 tournament. $2 million top prize, $1 million to second place, $25 entry. Who'd ever thought fantasy football going to make some 3 people millionaires in this one contest this year? We're joined this week by Eric Edholm. You know him. He's one of the lead NFL writers over there at Yahoo Sports, a guy that I've basically seen at every off-season event that I've attended for the last decade or so.
Right.
Eric, what the hell's going on, brother?
Yeah, man, it's always good to run into you at, Mobile or Indy or any of those places along the way. And now we're kind of in that typically a slow period for the NFL, but I do feel like there's a lot of news going on. So I don't know if it's been quite the laid back summer I was hoping for, but you know what? We do this stuff for a reason. We love it. So I'm happy to be here, man.
Yeah, man. Not quite the laid back, cool dad summer that we were all hoping for.
That's right.
But hey, man, thankfully the NFL gives us these things to talk about. And thankfully this is the time of year where we can kind of, I talk to some of the other guys who come on and we always say it's this is the time of year where you can, even though we are a little busier than usual, it is a time where you can huddle up a little bit with some of the minds that you like to kind of summon together and kind of get your thoughts together and stuff, because just during the season, talk about being busy. We're also
Absolutely
busy. You check in on your friends. You see the tweets coming by on the Twitter timeline. You're like, all right, they're good.
Live.
They're good. They're doing their thing. I'll catch up with them on the other side.
Yeah.
But a bunch that I wanted to talk to you about here, though, Eric. First off, just the news from kind of seems like it started developing late last week about Terry McLaurin. We had heard that he was unhappy with his contract, but now it's like he's saying he's holding out in mini camps. They're talking about the fact that he might hold out. He wants to be paid in the same stratosphere of these guys who have gotten paid so far this year. Some of these guys who have gotten these just giant deals. And Terry McLaurin now this season, he's going to be 27 years old. If you remember, I know you were at that Senior Bowl whenever he came out. He was an older prospect coming out. So even though he doesn't have quite the NFL wear on his tires yet, he is kind of on the other side of what the analytics people call the age apex for wide receivers. I wonder, what do you think the situation is for Terry McLaurin? Would you pay him? Do you think that the Jahan Dotson, the first round draft capital on Jahan Dotson might show sort of what the command? I'm not used to saying Commanders yet. What the Commanders might kind of have in mind. What's your read on this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to when we saw him at that Senior Bowl, I mean, he was so impressive there, not only in his play, but also his maturity and not just like the age number too. You could tell this is a guy that if he failed in the league, it was because he didn't have enough talent. You knew the work ethic was going to be there. Everybody talked about how smart he was, and all those things have really held up. I think it's, he's outperformed what you would normally see from a guy drafted late 3rd round or whatever. And I was shocked he lasted as long as he did, but he's been a great, hit for the Washington franchise. It probably had 3 different nicknames during his short time there too, right? They were the Redskins, the Washington football team, now the Commanders, but
and he's had 3 different nicknames himself. What do they call they call him Scary Terry and Run TMC and F45 and all these other things. So
usually I check on Pro Football Reference for the nicknames list. I wrote about those a couple of years ago because there's always 2 or 3 that I've never heard of before and think who called Tom Brady the Pharaoh? Things like that. But what? All right. There's actually a story behind that too. But Terry's earned all his nicknames, right? Especially for a team that has badly needed wide receiver help, that hasn't had the best quarterback play, the most consistent quarterback play. I mean, how many, different directions have they gone at that position? Now another one with Carson Wentz. And, obviously I think most people look at Wentz as kind of a last shot type of situation, at least as a starter in this league. The injury questions, the questions about how he fits in with his teammates, his effectiveness, all those things get bundled in. But yeah, I mean, I would think that if you are intent on getting the most out of Wentz, even with the Dotson pick, that you would have to have a Terry McLaurin in your lineup every single week, or as long as he's healthy for that matter, giving you what he gives you every single week. And I'd argue that even if his statistics have, I mean, I think he's gotten better every single year, right? You can't just go look straight at receptions, yards per catch and all that. But, I would venture to say that he had a real strong season last year, even if, his yards per game or what have you didn't quite add up to years past. So, clearly he and his agent have looked at the scenario out there, the landscape where all these guys are getting paid, and for good reason in a lot of cases. And you just kind of start stacking them up against some of the players on that list. Is he as good as, Cooper Kupp or Devontae Adams? Probably not. Probably not, right? AJ Brown.
But then what about Christian Kirk?
Right.
I mean, it's like, that would be the one that's stuck in my craw.
Absolutely.
I'd say I want more money than Christian Kirk got. Come on.
Yeah, that's a great starting point. I think he can aim even higher than that. I might argue he's. I mean, I would entertain an argument that he and DJ Moore. I mean, DJ's making over 20 a year, I believe, and you could make a very apples to apples fair comparison between those two, and other guys like maybe Brandon Cooks. Chris Godwin gets his deal with the ACL and everything. So Mike Williams with his health injury, health history, if you will.
Yeah.
Again, even if they're different types of receivers, I think that $20 million threshold average per year is really kind of the new starting point. I believe entering this offseason, we either had 8 or 9. The number might even be lower than that, but I want to say at the most that many $20 million per year receivers. I think we're at 12 now, without having the numbers in front of me. So you've obviously seen that millionaire club, 20 mil club go up by a 25% or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I would say the Commanders have to think long and hard about how they deal with this and how much they can offer and how deep they're willing to go.
It's like the wide receiver position is turning into. It's always been thought of as one of these positions where you can take a guy in the top 5. You can take a corner, take an offensive lineman, defensive lineman, you can take an edge guy, you can take a quarterback, of course, you can take a wide receiver, and it's like they're finally getting paid like these just super, super, super high end guys. Of course,
and they also develop faster too. I feel like when I first started, it was always like, well, you got to wait till year 3 on some of these guys, and that is true for some, but some are breaking out like Jamar Chase and whatnot. I mean, it's like the timetables completely changed with that position.
Right. And then as far as a quarter, I want to ask you a few quarterback questions.
Sure.
These are all the I bring on Eric Edholm for the unanswerable questions. Just try to give us a little context. But what is the answer with Baker? Because, or maybe should I ask you about Deshaun Watson before Baker? Because does that even come into the conversation with whether Baker could get traded? So just let me ask you this. What about Deshaun Watson? I know that nobody in the world knows what's going to happen. Nobody in the world has access to all the documents. Nobody in the world knows what went on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I know very few people in my life that cover the NFL for longer and more closely than you have. You've seen a million different situations. You work there at Yahoo with guys like Charles Robinson, who knows all the different rules about this kind of stuff. What is your gut feeling about this whenever you hear people like Mike Florio say you think he might miss the whole year, but then you hear guys like Michael Lombardi saying how can he play this year? But then you hear other people who are just stating precedent based on previous stuff that the NFL is probably going to give him 8 games, and maybe that even gets cut down. And do you have any thoughts about this and where we could be come September, whenever we're looking at Deshaun Watson, whether or not he's going to be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns?
Yeah, it's a completely fair question, but as you pointed out, it's really tricky to arrive at an answer. Number one, because I always felt it was difficult in the Roger Goodell era, which now spans, 15 years or whatever, to use past precedent as unless it's something that's, collectively bargained in the CBA. I mean, he's sort of this, judge and jury, if you will, in a lot of these discipline cases. And I feel like there's not always that ironclad standard, where some of these rules feel a little bit unfair sometimes, but again, these are things that the union collectively agreed on with the owners and such. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the subjective ones where,
right,
the league can come in and hand down any number it wants. And this applies to the Watson situation. It's always tricky to look back because there does feel like there's an inconsistency. People view these cases, through their own lenses and their own perspectives and say, this one's definitely worse than the last one. I don't know that we've had anything like Carson Wentz, like Deshaun Watson before. And, the sheer number of allegations against him. And I think we have to go back. I believe it was late in May. Correct me if I'm wrong. The last time Goodell spoke publicly on the matter, and people asked, what's the timetable? When can we expect some information? And, he made it sound at that point, now 3-4 weeks ago, whatever it was, like things were kind of winding down a little. Then we have the real sports with the victims speaking out and going into detail about what they claim to have experienced and what happened in the New York Times story with the 66 visits in a 17-month span, raising other questions about how much more is there? Are there other women who didn't come forward? Are there women who plan to eventually? Have some already received payouts or anything that we don't know about? And most of all, how much of those recent reports did the league already dig up or know in its investigation? If they already factored it in, we could get a decision this week or next or very shortly,
right,
by 4th of July weekend, let's say, or shortly thereafter. I know the Browns certainly want to know what's going on. Get their clear. Yeah, right. It's only the quarterback, my God, the one you handed out a fully guaranteed $230 million contract. I'm not laughing at the allegations.
No,
of course
not.
None of us are. Yeah, but it's a contract that I can tell you, having spoken to a few high-ranking team officials. In fact, one I spoke to who had already gotten his quarterback contract taken care of shortly before, in the months leading up to it, and one whose team has not yet been able to do that. And their responses couldn't have been more stark. Like, wow, I'm glad we got ours done when we did, and didn't have to have an agent come in and say, well, if Deshaun's getting $230 guarantee, what are you going to give my guy? Right. The other one felt like, boy, this contract was. I mean, if Deshaun Watson had, first of all, he wouldn't have been on the open market. But second of all, had he gotten this kind of a deal, let's say, from the Houston Texans, and none of these allegations existed, okay, like, you get it. But with everything that's hanging over him, that contract and the pending suspension is very. It's going to be quite telling or whatever.
Well, because an agent could come in there and to go to general manager and say, what, you're worried about my guy coming off an ACL tear? Like, Who cares? Like, Deshaun Watson's coming off 66 allegations or whatever. Right. It's like, why can't my guy get the guaranteed money? It wasn't like
absolutely
that guy's sure deal. Yeah, that's it. I guess I never thought about it from that angle. Yeah. But it's true, man. That makes it tough on a GM. For sure.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I mean, I really would I be shocked if he was suspended for the entire season? At this point, probably not. Would 8 or 10 games surprise me? I don't think it would, but I think there'd be some blowback. I think there would obviously be a kind of a visceral reaction from his many critics, and many people were saying he doesn't deserve to play this year or what have you. So there's even been some talk of waiting until there's a little bit more clarity on the situation. So maybe this timetable we're working under doesn't really exist yet. I don't know. I mean, it's been, the league has been very, very quiet and hush hush on its plans.
So from that unanswerable question to another here, what about Baker? What about Baker? Because now it's come back up. The talks between the Browns and the Panthers have not necessarily been ongoing, but have happened. Does the thing with Deshaun Watson still being up in the air, does that even come into – Baker can't go play for them again, right? He's not going to go in and play for them while Deshaun Watson's on his way back. Like, what do you think is going to happen with Baker? Do you think – would you like his fit in Carolina? Matt Rule trying to trying to save a job, bringing Baker Mayfield in to try and steer the ship? What do you think about this whole thing?
And count me as somebody who has not given up on Baker Mayfield yet. Now, I understand his limitations, and I understand that, it's been this kind of seesaw thing where he's been good, bad. I definitely think the injury was a factor that I don't know, say people overlooked, but I definitely feel like that hindered him. He may have hurt himself in a sense by trying to play through this thing, even if it wasn't his throwing shoulder. But it was so funny to me to see, not funny, but interesting to me to see how when Mayfield kind of said his goodbyes prior to the team making any kind of announcements, there wasn't any real clarity, and Baker basically said, "Peace, I'm out." Yeah. He had kind of changed the narrative a little bit and changed the thinking, I think. And Carolina, it sounded like initially was like, nope, we're good. We got other plan, and even Mayfield was kind of like, yeah, that's not really my preferred destination. But bringing back memories of my own like 6th grade dances is like everybody starts coupling up, and I'm sitting there like twiddling my thumbs, like, what do I do now? And there's like that one girl across the room kind of, shuffling her feet. That's the one I ended up kind of asking to dance. Long metaphor and a little dark childhood humor there, but it really does feel like there's just not a lot of, you've got Jimmy Garoppolo, who makes a lot of money and is coming off surgery this offseason, may not be available, he certainly isn't going to be there for the June mini camps, and you're betting that he'll be there for the start of camp. That's a tough ask. Baker Mayfield, you'd think is healthy by this point, was still making a decent amount of money, I think 18, 19 million, whatever it is for this year. When those trade talks eventually developed and it looked like something was going to happen during the draft, after only Kenny Pickett win day one, it sounded like they were going on through the draft. And I think the hang up was the money. How much could Cleveland take off to ease the load on Carolina? It would be an awkward situation. Obviously, they draft Matt Corral. They've got Sam Darnold there. Baker comes in. I think everybody knows who the presumed starter would be.
Oh, yeah.
But, outside of some pretty good offensive weapons, you got a rookie left tackle. The question about Rule being on the hot seat, new offensive coordinator, everything is kind of up in the air. And is McCaffrey going to be healthy and himself? They're great with him. They're not great with him without him. So
I hope so.
There's a lot to figure out with Mayfield, and if he does end up at Carolina, whether that's a fruitful place for him.
Don't you think that Baker Mayfield would give Matt Rule his best chance to keep a job over any of those others?
Yep, I 100% agree. Look, Matt Corral could be a talented kid who ends up playing well at some point, but am I trusting him to be my week one starter? No. Is Darnold giving you any kind of, fool's gold sort of false hope? I hope not. I think he's if we have to start him, we will, but that's not what they want to do. And yeah, I would say that a motivated Baker coming in and throwing to some decent receivers could be an interesting thing.
They have sort of a little. I have to look back and see whether or not they cross paths. Maybe for 1 year in the Big 12 when Matt Rule was still at Baylor, that Oklahoma. Maybe for 1 year, maybe
possibly.
Not. I'd have to look back and see. Well, regardless, they both know that kind of football. They're from that. Like they both kind of understand that world. They kind of know. I guarantee that they kind of know one another. But the thing about Tepper is, we've heard the words about Tepper in the last couple of weeks saying that he might be starting to sour a little bit on Rule. And so would you listen to Rule saying that he wants to bring this dude in who's going to be an expensive guy who's been a failure elsewhere as a first overall pick? So that'll be an interesting, again, impossible question to answer. What about some of these? I want to ask you about some fantasy dichotomies in a minute. But first, I just wanted to ask you, what about Will Fuller? What do you think about Will Fuller? He's still hanging around out there. Last I checked, which was yesterday. I don't know if anything's happened this morning. What happened? Do you think with him down in Miami? And is that his word maybe got my working theory that we came up with very unscientifically here on this podcast with one of my other co-hosts was that something happened in Miami where it's like word finally got out that this dude just gets way too hurt.
Yeah.
And like, it's like people have always thought about it before. Maybe there's something that happened in Miami with that injury that maybe like just how the word's out on Fuller. That's all I can guess right now. Do you have any ideas about Will Fuller, about why a guy who's been just in spurts when he's been healthy, man, he's been really good for a while once he got acclimated to the NFL, but it feels like there's no interest out there. You know, people keep pressing the Packers. Are you going to bring in Fuller? People kept pressing before all the Deshaun Watson stuff, the Browns, whether you're going to reunite him with Deshaun Watson, there's never any interest.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what your take on the whole Will Fuller thing is.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that I think has been somewhat of a victim of a third straight year in the draft where the wide receiver position has been strong. So we're talking about a large influx of new talent into the league while his career, I mean, even with that 2020 season when he had some fireworks, right? I mean, he had, it was like seemed like he was getting 80 yards and a touchdown every single week, or big games. And then, but you're right. I mean, the fact that he's never played a full season healthy, the fact that last year was a total wash, basically. I don't even know how many games he played, 2 or 3, whatever it was. So,
yeah, did he play 2?
I think maybe 2. I mean, I'd have to go look, but right, it's just the fact that I mean, when he came out, there were questions among scouts like
with his hands and stuff.
Yep. Could he catch the ball, and was he made of balsa wood? That was sort of there were a lot of like little sprinter injuries, like hamstrings and groins and calves that always sort of be barking and acting up. And I remember at his pro day, I forget what happened. There was like, he opted out of a drill or something. And it wasn't like people were saying, oh, don't draft this kid. It was just a little bit of buyers beware. And I feel like that's just grown every year. But yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, I think he's the type of guy that should get a chance at some point. Speed like that doesn't just exist anywhere, everywhere. So, but yeah, the places you mentioned all kind of passed on him, it seemed like. So there naturally is a little bit of suspicion. What's he, 28 years old? I mean, he's still young,
Let's see. How old is Will Fuller going to be this year? He's going to be 28 this year. 28.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, what about Julio Jones? Because it feels like the sentiment around Julio, believe it or not, might be a little bit warmer whenever they ask about places like Green Bay and stuff like that. Do you think Julio Jones still has some gas in the tank? I mean, clearly he hasn't had the same numbers from a traditional statistics perspective, but you do hear some of these PFF guys and stuff say like these yards per route run and stuff. Like when he's out there, some of that stuff hasn't fallen off quite as much as you might think, despite him looking a little bit older and more decrepit. Do you think that he's going to land somewhere? And do you think that Julio Jones still has gas in the tank?
Yeah, I mean, right. Obviously, you'd probably figure it would be a 1-year deal. Like if he does get, it might require an injury of some sort to give him an opportunity somewhere. And you have to know what you're getting. You have to realize that there's, this is not the Julio of 2016 or whatever. And when he was, obviously such a rare difference maker and everything. I mean, I'd be curious about like a team like the Colts maybe too, with Matt Ryan there. I mean, would he,
yeah.
I mean,
the most obvious thing. I haven't even thought about that.
It hadn't occurred to me till just the other day when I was sort of looking at some free agents and who might end up where and everything. And, obviously the Colts wide receiver group is promising, but there's still a lot. I mean, Paris Campbell's never done it. Michael Pittman is really good, but Alec Pierce is a rookie. There may be a need for that big bodied guy to help out. Maybe they want more of a quicker slot guy if T.Y. Hilton's, kind of limited or whatever. So I don't know, man. I'm just kind of trying to figure out. Obviously Green Bay, as you mentioned, you would think they would sort of be interested, but kind of feels like, unless I'm misreading the tea leaves, that they're sort of, setting sail with what they have, and the lack of a wide receiver one be damned, right? And they'll just sort of figure it out and trust Aaron Rodgers to make all the best reads and stuff. But maybe Cleveland is waiting on adding a receiver until they get clarity on the quarterback situation. Maybe there's a financial aspect to it that's holding them up while they have these guys on the roster carrying a big chunk of the salary cap right now.
Let me ask you a couple of just questions on the fantasy side. Of course, we're talking with Eric Edholm. You can find him on Twitter at Eric_Edholm, EDHOLM. M
Nailed it.
Eric _Edholm.
There it is.
And of course he's a great friend of ours. We hope you'll go give him a follow. He tweets out all of his work from there, and also shares a bunch of great insights. So please go give him a follow. And of course, we always thank Eric for taking some time to come on. Let me ask you, because I was going to ask you these fantasy questions, but I'm clicking on this one little tier right here. And before I ask you these, just one more thing about one specific player.
Yeah.
Back to Tennessee, but not Julio. What about Treylon Burks? What did you think of Burks as a prospect? What did you think about that trade? And what do you think? Well, let me ask you this. What's your level of comfort that he's going to come in and he's going to be a really, be the kind of dominating force that they hope he's going to be able to be in year one?
At the risk of looking silly, 6 months from now, I'm a little concerned. I mean, and it had less to do with the fact that he looked to be a little out of shape at OTAs. That happens, right? We've seen guys, have that happen in June, and okay, now I know what I got to do, and they're fine, right? Obviously, the opportunity is there. There's no question. With Robert Woods coming off the injury, boy, like who else do they even have at this point, right? I mean, there's a lot of
Nick Westbrook-Akina.
Right. That's it, yeah. I guess. I mean, unless you're
I think Adam Humphries might still be on that roster somehow.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, right. Yeah, it feels like it. But yeah, I mean, there's clearly an opportunity for him to come in and start right away. But the way he was used at Arkansas, predominantly in the slot, not exclusively, but he was a lot of times that big slot, and other times in the backfield, wildcat quarterback, other run plays where he was involved. And, I get it, with a big quarterback who can run and a big wide receiver can run, you can do some creative stuff. But the chatter among some scouts was that like, well, why are all his touches rather seemingly schemed up? You rarely saw him lined up outside the numbers, one-on-one, beating press coverage and making a play. Mainly because they didn't ask him to do it. Did they just feel like they liked their other options on the outside and felt like he was their best option inside? Maybe. Also giving them these kind of, trick play touches and whatnot, all these other things that they did with him, reverses and handoffs and whatnot, throwing the ball. I threw the ball like 7 times in college. Or were they worried about, his ability to digest coverages and learn an entire playbook and figure out? If that's the case and it's year 3, I'm a little worried. So I loved watching Burks in college. I can remember talking to LSU, some coaches there in 2019 when he was a freshman. They said, that is what a first-round receiver looks like. And they were right.
Yeah.
But it's been a little bit, there's a little bit of concern for me.
Okay. So I was gonna ask you whether you preferred Treylon Burks, or if you had to choose between these guys, Darnell Mooney. You're a Chicago guy, right?
Yeah.
So Darnell Mooney, Gabriel Davis in Buffalo, who's coming off that monster end of last season, or Treylon Burks. Those guys are in a little bit of a tier, going very close to one another in these super early sicko drafts that some of us are drafting in. Do you have a lean one direction out of those three? So it's Gabe Davis, Treylon Burks, or Darnell Mooney.
And I'm always thankful for the sickos too. I really am, because I mean, like, they help me kind of figure out, what's going to happen or whatever. I think of the 3, I would prefer Gabe Davis. I think, there's always a little bit of hesitation to look at the one big playoff game and equate it to 17 games and okay, boom, there it is. He's just going to be a superstar this year. I don't know that that's the case, but and I was totally wrong on him coming out. I was kind of, yeah, okay, he's good. He's good. He's big. He runs well. I sort of thought he was a little bit of a one-trick pony, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The more I've looked at him, the more I've talked to the Bills about him, the more excited I get and they get. I think he could end up at, a top 24 wide receiver this year when it's all said and done. And, obviously that offense is super productive place to be. They've got their weapons figured out. It's going to maybe arguably be more balanced this year. I like Mooney, and I think he's got some special little traits, but I don't know that you can realistically count on a player of his dimensions being, anything. I don't want to say a wide receiver 1 necessarily, because at that point, it could But look, I just don't think he's going to be your traditional volume receiver. I think he'll have a nice year. I really do. But it's the same worry you might have with an Elijah Moore, even if, there are more receivers in New York. So I would probably order them of the three. I would say Gabe Davis is my favorite, Mooney probably second. And I would say, if this is a 1-year redraft league,
yes,
then Burks would be my third choice.
And it's like another thing that comes in there is like sometimes when these guys are real close, you can just look. It's like, well, which one's on the best team? And sometimes that can make a difference. Chicago and Tennessee aren't going to be very high volume passing offense.
I agree. Yep.
All right. So how about another one? I'll give you two more here, and then I'll get you out of here if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. So how about this one? Rashad Bateman. So these guys are all interesting for their own ways. Rashad Bateman, now that Marquise Brown's out of the way, right?
Yep.
For the Baltimore Ravens. Drake London, who in Atlanta feels like he's got a really good runway to a lot of targets, but maybe not the good quarterback or team situation. And then Jerry Jeudy in Denver, who clearly he's got a major upgraded quarterback in Russell Wilson. So that's Jerry Jeudy for the Broncos, Drake London for the Falcons, or Rashad Bateman for the Ravens, all going very, very close to one another.
Yeah. Where's London going? Like, I'm just curious where he's kind of been slotted in most.
All these guys are gone in the early best ball drafts by like the end of the 5th, beginning of the 6th round.
Okay, got it. All right. I mean, I'm a Bateman fan. I liked him coming out a lot, and it was another guy that he just. The more I watched, the more special I thought he was. I don't think you can give up on Jerry Jeudy, and clearly the quarterback change is going to be a massive difference for him. But I am tempted to say Bateman ahead of Jeudy by just, they would be almost stacked back to back on my list without, I don't do fantasy rankings, but they'd be pretty close. But I think I'm fascinated by Bateman's potential. I think there'll be a little bit of hand-wringing by his owners, and if he doesn't have the 180-yard 3-touchdown game once or twice a year, like I don't know that he's going to have those massive explosive games. And there is a concern. Like I think he had a couple games last year where you had, no yards or less than 10, a couple of disappearing acts late down the year, but in between you saw enough. The game against the Browns was really impressive. There was I'm trying to remember who they played late in the year. Was it the Rams game? He had a couple clutch catches, I want to say, in that tight ball game. And they lost so much. I almost feel like the value might be a little bit better by the time we get to what I call draft season, August,
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't put London quite in that tier, but that's just me personally, mainly because look, I think Marcus Mariota, there's some limitations to his game. Pitts is obviously the go-to guy. London is still young. He's hasn't played a ton of college football. The ankle did knock out his year last year, but you can't ignore what he did I suspect his catch and yard averages are going to be pretty impressive. I don't know that he'll get as many scoring opportunities in that offense. I don't know that they're going to be super explosive outside of those two guys. So I think right now that I would say Bateman a hair ahead of Jeudy. We still got to see him. Does Russ trust him? Is he going to become the Lockett in that offense? I don't know. So I'd go Bateman, Jeudy, and then maybe a few spots below that, Drake London.
All right. So this will be the toughest one yet as far as guys whose ADPs are just right in there with one another. Okay, so how about we go with this? Terry McLaurin, who we talked about earlier. Allen Robinson in a new home, finally with the best quarterback he's ever had in his career, at least that we know about, dating back to college, in Matthew Stafford for the Rams. And a guy in a completely different situation, playing with the worst quarterback that we've ever seen him have, DK Metcalf for the Seattle Seahawks. So that's Terry McLaurin, Allen Robinson, DK Metcalf. Where does Eric Edholm go? Because these guys are all going between like pick 4. like if you're in the 4th round,
Yeah.
about the 6th pick of the 4th round and the 10th or 11th pick of the 4th
Okay, so
round.
mid to
so
late.
they're all right in that pocket. We've had like a 1-round spread for the other ones. This is a close one.
Yeah, right. Both in that kind of wide receiver 2 range or whatever. Yeah. I think if you're drafting anytime soon and the Mclaurin deal hasn't gotten done, I understand if there's fear about like, is he gonna stay out of camp? What's he gonna do? What's the next move? I suspect that'll work itself out. So that to me I'm going to put that issue aside. Everything we talked about earlier, like right now, I don't think that has a major effect on his fantasy season. I like Allen Robinson. I do. I'm not as enamored with him as some others are, simply for the fact that it's valid, but we've relied on that whole crutch of, well, he's never had a great quarterback and he's just frustrated. Look what happened to him in Jacksonville. Look what happened to him in Chicago.
Yeah.
And it's undeniable. But I don't know. There's already been some early chatter that, maybe don't expect crazy fireworks from him. Like, okay, the shackles are off and McVay's gonna scheme this dude up and everything. Clearly, with Woods not there, there's an opportunity, no doubt, right? Cooper Kupp, we know how dangerous he could be, but that offense can produce multiple branches of fruit. Even so, I feel like he could end up getting overdrafted, and I feel like Metcalf could maybe get underdrafted because of the bad quarterback situation, or seemingly bad. Part of me, though, thinks that there's still going to be ways for them to get him the ball.
Yeah, right.
This is tough. The more I think about it,
these are impossible questions. That's going to be the name of the podcast.
I appreciate you asking them. I may not give you a great answer. I think I would say I feel best about Mclaurin, even with Wentz and everything else. And then I would say Metcalf and Robinson really close in that order. That's how I'd probably put him if I had to, if somebody was on a podcast asking me that, right?